A big surprise update for Civilization 7 just dropped. There were some massive buffs to civilizations and leaders, but firstly, let's take a quick look at the quote-unquote new features. To start, Firaxis have added a Pangea Plus map type, probably a fairly familiar map type to legacy Civ players. It features one large central landmass as well as some surrounding islands that count as the distant lands. The second, perhaps related new feature here is an increase to the multiplayer player limit. The maximum number of human players on maps in Antiquity and Exploration Age has been increased up to the default size of the map, so up to 8 players. Should the number of human players not fit on the homelands, they will also now be able to spawn in distant lands during these ages. And just before we move on to talk about the colossal changes to civilizations and leaders, I wanted to first actually highlight one section buried a little deeper in the patch notes. Changes to military, warfare, combat, all of that stuff. I've highlighted my key ones. You can see all of them on your screen here, and of course linked down below as always. Some of them are a little smaller, maybe less important. Secondary unit combat strength effects have been removed from all resources. Naval units can heal when resting on neutral coastal tiles in the modern age, and those units on a player's navigable river urban district can now be attacked by land-based melee units. The actual change here, though, perhaps the most significant one, is that the Razing penalty for burning down a settlement no longer grants free war support against you. War support, of course, against you will remove your happiness and therefore perhaps the ability to get celebrations and social policy slots, as well as your combat strength in the fight. The change now, instead, sees the doubling of the usual influence yield penalty from conquest for the remainder of the current age. And this, of course, could impact some of the playstyles and strategies of the leaders and civs who have changed. Let's take a quick peek, starting with a double whammy. Both versions of Frederick have changed. The first one gains an infantry unit now when you complete a technology mastery, that second stage of researching and tech, or constructing a science building instead of just from construction. And the second version of this chap receives a similar benefit but mirrored, this time for civic masteries, the cultural side of things, and constructing a cultural building instead of just construction. You'll also receive a little bonus to culture here, +1 per age, on displayed great works. The idea here was essentially to boost up these leaders who just didn't seem to quite do enough. Next up, third on the list is Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut's ability has essentially been broadened. You used to receive +1 culture for every imported resource. You now receive +1 culture per age for each unique resource. So that's every instance of a resource, whether you've traded for it or it's your own. Obviously, the benefit here, as the devs noted, will be seen perhaps later in the game. In the modern age, where maybe maintaining trade routes is a little more difficult and you have plenty of resources of your own. This is fairly significant. The high shaman version of Himiko has also seen an expansion to her abilities. The devs felt that her happiness bonuses were powerful but a little bit too narrow, and so expanding that out to include bonuses on influence buildings would be a good boost. Now, +2 happiness per age is granted on both happiness and influence buildings, and you'll receive a 50% production bonus towards constructing both of those types of structures too. Captain Riz over here receives a boost to the Riz yield, indeed influence. When gaining rewards from a narrative event as Jose now, you'll gain an additional 20 culture, gold, and 20 influence per age. They thought it was a good buff for a diplomatic leader to grant direct influence. And of course, influence can be a very powerful yield. This cutie was also patched. Pachacutie cities now gain a bonus to production, equal to 10% of the food. Of course, already potentially a food king, now we see some of that bleed through into production, as Pachacutie would often fall behind. And our final leader, was yours included? I hope so. Our last one here is Xerxes Achaemenid, who receives +10 trade range. And that's it. The devs say that they feel like the focus on trade here works well, and this gives a little bit more flexibility to the Silk Road ability, so you don't have to trade off, say, settling close to people to have them within range versus settling in good locations. The idea is you should now be able to do both. Changing pace, moving through to the Civilizations, Bulgaria fans may be a little disappointed, as 2 DLC civs see some changes. Bulgaria's one rather interesting. The commander unit now allows units to pillage for 1 movement instead of no movement. Okay, nice. They also, quote, swap the effects of the Krum dynasty's unique ability that grants food on pillaging with the false retreat tradition that grants production on pillaging. A little bit of a stepped process now. The takeaway is that when you transition through the ages, you'll now inherit the new version of false retreat tradition that grants food. They say that while it was fun to see strategic players pull off extremely fast win with the tradition in the modern age, that was not intended. This change lets Bulgaria shine in exploration without completely trivializing the modern age. So, a bit of a step back in that case, perhaps. Second DLC civilization, Great Britain. They receive more culture now from their unique unit when it uses the excavate artifact action. You'll now get plus 20 for every tile in your capital, rather than plus 5 culture. A significant boost. The financial center now grants plus 2 gold and plus 2 science per connected settlement instead of just the gold. Kumai receives, honestly, a perhaps relatively underwhelming change, given that introduction I just did. Settlements with a beret unique building now grant immunity to flood damage. They made the change so that your immunity to river damage could remain after the age transition. Speaking of things remaining after an age transition, a sort of longer-term effect out of Civilizations, the next 2 feature this as well. Here, Majapahit receives, well, their unique quarter now grants an empire-wide discount to upgrading towns into cities, a passive effect that you can carry through. Speaking of carry through, the change to the Normans, their unique quarter now granting plus 10% production towards training cavalry units in that city, is carried through with the same logic in mind. A little bit of a bonus that you can take through into future ages or, of course, utilize in the current one. Not massive, but nice to see. The final 3 civilizations that have changed have deeper changes. There's more going on here, spending just slightly longer on it. The first one I feel personally just a little bit disappointed by, changes to Inca. The terrace farm has been completely redesigned. It now gives plus 4 base food, and gives adjacent buildings plus 1 gold adjacency bonus. It no longer requires a mountain. It can be built on any rough terrain without a feature or a river. Their justification here is, while requiring a mountain reflected the historical reality for the civilization, they found it got in the way of gameplay more often than not. They thought about making it extremely powerful to make up for those restrictions to where you can place it, but decided instead to, quote, let you play with your civ's unique options more often instead, end quote. It feels a little bit like the soul was removed from Inca though, no? I'm personally absolutely in team, keep it near a mountain and make it extremely powerful to make up for the fact that it's somewhat restricted. Maybe that's just me. Moving along to Russia, their unique ability, Prosveshchenie, was changed to provide plus 1 culture and plus 1 science on districts. Doubled in Tundra. The devs added a lot of notes here saying they wanted to double down on rewarding players for prioritizing Tundra tiles. Nice to see, sort of the opposite of my criticism of Inca playing out here. This is a good thing, in my view. The unique improvement now also provides plus 2 culture in Tundra and plus 2 food on all farms in the settlement. They say that this change was made to help with usability. Modern settlements often have limited rural space, and trying to plan an improvement, place that down while considering what other improvements were adjacent to it was sometimes apparently a little bit too frustrating. I don't have massive thoughts or feelings on that second part. And the final civilization that has changed today, Songhai. The initial description you see of Songhai's abilities now highlights that it can produce treasure fleets in the homeland with the Kanta Civic. The value of these treasure fleets was increased from 1 point to 2 points. Their unique unit is also cheaper to produce, with slower scaling costs, and they have a new unique ability, plus 3 gold for each active trade route. The devs said that this was one of their civs that has an alternate pathway to legacy path completion. They wanted to make sure that it was clear, as well as the same way that it is with Mongolia. Additionally, Songhai's gold gameplay was powerful when it worked, but could flounder. They've tried to buff the trade gameplay to raise the general amount of cash, the floor that you'll receive for Songhai. So on one part, it's just highlighting what it could already do and strengthening that a bit more. And at the second part, you'll receive gold for active trade, a little bit of extra cash money while you're playing as Songhai. Oh boy, there's a lot of civ changes. In this last section, we're going to talk about your opponents and the way the game looks. It's diplomacy, UI, and AI. Let's start with diplomacy. I've highlighted a couple of changes. There wasn't a huge amount. However, influenced costs of levying a unit from a independent tribe, independent peoples, is now equal to its production cost. And open borders will be completely lost after an alliance is accepted, rejected, or itself lost. Other improvements here tend to reflect bug fixes. There were a lot of those in the full patch notes, or some related changes. And when you're fighting against those opponents, maybe using that diplomacy, the AI changes are very important here too. The AI has been given a few sort of free passes, a couple of little cheeky buffs. The AI now suffers less damage than the player on deep ocean tiles when you're playing on higher difficulties. It should also be a little bit more intelligent. It's now more thoughtful when placing unique quarters. And the commander pathing should be a little bit better to go alongside those war changes. It should also generally not ignore enemy units outside a settlement when at war and launching an attack on that settlement. It should be a little bit more aware of where your units are and where its military units are, and the fact that they should actually be fighting one another. Finally, the UI has received a whole host of changes, including massive generic ones. I say massive because there are lots of them, not because you'll necessarily notice a lot of change. But there are many changes to be had. As well as those generic changes, there are controller-specific ones, changes to Civipedia, and about 10 or 12 fixes to alignment and spacing. Though, if you've watched this video somewhat closely, you'll note that many issues still persist. The broader user interface absolutely needs a facelift. Lots of problem areas still proving problematic for people. And finally, extra for experts here, some platform-specific changes. Seems like PlayStation may be the greatest benefactor here with improvements to game flow and stability. The rest just receive some relatively minor fixes, perhaps. Also important to note that not all versions of the game receive the updates at the same time, and potentially not in the same magnitude. I believe that some of the player cap limits on multiplayer, for example, that we discussed at the start of the video, may not apply to Nintendo Switch. Anyway, this has been one heck of an update video. Thank you very much for your patience recently, and thank you for being here, for watching. I'll see you next time.